to ACWS's Outcome Tracker training videos. In this video, I'm going to walk you through how to create a query and some of the more common settings that you might want to adjust on queries. So once you log in to Outcome Tracker, you will want to go to Reports. So let's click on that. And in the upper right-hand corner here, you will see this taskbar. We want to add a new query. I'm going to call this it defaults to your personal folder. I think that's a pretty good place to put it unless you're certain that you're going to get exactly what you want, and then you can just put it in whichever folder you need, like so. But for now, I'm just going to put it in my personal folder. Columns are the bits of data that you want to display in your query. So Outcome Tracker sorts them in particular ways. You can pull demographics from here, and if you want information on roles, it will be here. You can pull relationship stuff here. You can pull advanced here. Mostly you will probably be pulling from here, all enrollments. And then so when you click on all enrollments, you'll want to pull a couple things from details. And that's enrollment activity description you will almost always want. Enrollment begin date you will almost always want. You might want enrollment hours if it's things like counseling and you want to count the number of hours. You might want enrollment provider, which is the staff, if you want to know who exactly is providing the training or the counseling. How many hours each counselor is working, you could put in enrollment provider and enrollment hours. For now, I'm going to stick from this little area, I'm going to stick with enrollment activity description and enrollment begin date. These two you almost always want. These two here are default, and you'll probably always want those two. So I always keep those in, and then I almost always add these two. And then once you do that, you'll want to go to questions, show by activity, repeatable activities, and then find your activity in this list. So for me, I want this one, and I'm just going to select all of these and move them over. It may be the case that you don't want all of them. If you're really only interested in one thing, then you can pull that. One thing that you can't do, let's say for instance I wanted a question from the call contacts. I can't just add it in here now. That's not the way the queries work. There is a way that you can add questions from two different activities into one query, and that's by creating a subquery, which we will go over later in this very video. But you can't just add from two different activities into the same query without a subquery. So just something to remember. Usually when you create a query, you'll be creating a query because you want information from a single activity, and when that's the case, this is how you do it. If you just want information from one single activity, then you can come in here and go to all enrollments and details and pull those couple of details that I pulled, enrollment activity description and enrollment begin date, and then questions, repeatable activities, questions show by activity, then repeatable activities, and then find your activity in the list. And then, so we have all that, so let's click next. This is the sort order. Typically, by default, it sorts your query by full name. So what that means is that the query will be sorted alphabetically by the last name, first name, middle name. You can sort by any other field that you want. Typically, you probably won't change this setting, but it may be the case that, for instance, you want to sort by enrollment begin date because you want the earliest dates first and the later dates at the end of the list. That could be the case. Typically, you'll just keep it here. Let's click next. And this is where you do your filterings. Filtering is where the magic happens, really. Filtering is where you tell Outcome Tracker exactly what you're looking for. And you will almost always filter on at least two settings, and that is enrollment activity description. The enrollment activity description is basically the name of the activity. So we want the name of the activity that we pulled the information from, which in our case is this. And then next. The other column that you will probably always want to filter from is enrollment begin date. And this is a little confusing because you will likely want to almost always have two filters on this. So I'm going to select that. And then I'm going to talk about the filtering. So basically, if you've run a report on Outcome Tracker, you're probably familiar with the start date, end date filters that are prompts in Outcome Tracker in almost every report. What this does is filters on this column, enrollment begin date. And you may think that you would want to filter on enrollment begin date and then enrollment end date, enrollment begin date for the start and enrollment end date for the end date, but that's actually not accurate. You want to filter both on the enrollment begin date, unless, of course, you're looking for people who have discharged between a certain date, then you would look on the enrollment end date. But for this instance, and almost every instance, you'd want to filter on enrollment begin date. And the way that this works is, I think of it as bookends. You want greater than or equal to on one end, and then less than or equal to on the other end. So let's start with greater than or equal to. So, and we want a prompt. We will want a prompt for both of these. And that is the box on the reports that you can fill in to pull the information that you need. We want to create a new prompt field. I usually start with start date. And this is the default value. I like to change the default value for the start date to the first day of the last month. So basically what we're saying is the enrollment begin date is greater than or equal to the start date, which defaults to the first day of the last month. Now we want to add the second filter, and enrollment begin date again. And now we want to be less than or equal to prompt. We want to create a new prompt and field again. This time we want to call it the end date. And this time we want to set the default value to the last day of the last month. Now, it may be that you want to filter on other things, like maybe you're interested in seeing how many people exit on a Monday. Maybe you're interested in doing more detailed analysis on the age, so you could do a prompt for the age of the client, or you could do a prompt for the favorite animals. Maybe you're only interested in people who said panda was their favorite animal. You can filter more than one, but typically you will want just enrollment activity description, enrollment begin date with greater than or equal to, and enrollment begin date with less than or equal to. Those you will almost always want, and those may actually be the only filters that you need. So I'm just going to finish here, and then we'll create my query. And then let's look at the results so we can see those filters. So you'll see here we have the start date with the first day of the last month. As I record this, it's February 23rd, 2017. And then we have the last day of the last month. Let's say we want to see information for the calendar year 2016. We just change this to 2016, January 1st, 2016, and then we can change this to December 31st, 2016. And there we see we have a few responses. So these are 3 common filters that you will want probably on almost any report that you or query that you create. Other fields that you might want to filter on, that you will commonly filter on, are type of program or role. So I'm going to show you how you can filter on role. Now, one thing that is quite great about the queries is that once you create a query, if you then realize that there's a column that you needed to add, then you can add those really easily on Outcome Tracker. It's not a problem at all. So for instance, I want to filter on role, but I don't have the role column available to me. So I have to add that. So I will go to add. You'll see this familiar window. This is where we originally pulled the information. Now if I want to add role, I would go to under demographics, I'll go to roles. And I would move that over. You might also want role membership status. This is where information on active and inactive roles are stored. So for instance, if you only wanted active roles, then you could filter for this to be active. Often it's the case that if you're going to filter on role, you probably want to filter on role membership status or role membership begin or end date, which you can filter on just as we did with the enrollment begin date. But this isn't something that you will likely put in every query. It may be something that you never use, but it is useful. It may be the case that you want to filter on activity on residential adults to make sure that you don't get any children in your query. If that's what you want, then that's how you would do that. You would filter on role. And program name, if you ever wanted to filter on program name, you can only do that on activities that have the program name. Most activities have the program name now, and you would just do that as a regular question. So I'm going to add these 2. But for instance, if my activity had program name, I would have pulled it in with all of these other questions, and then I could filter on that quite easily. If you want to add a filter, you go to the Filter tab, and then you click Add Filter. And you'll see this familiar window. Let's say I want only roles that equal residential adults. Let's see if that changes the results at all. It doesn't change our results at all, so. But that is how you would add a filter. So it's quite easy to add columns and filters after you create your query. Now I'm going to discuss summarizing. You'll see here there are 2 enrollments from Sally Red. This happens sometimes when you have activities where the person, a client, might enroll or fill out the same activity more than once. And when that happens, you have to decide if you want information on the number of enrollments or information on the number of clients, because those will be 2 different numbers. So for our query now, you'll see there are 3 clients but 4 enrollments. So if you want the number of enrollments, that's easy, because all you have to do is know group summarization, which is the default setting. So if you want the number of enrollments and not the number of clients, then you don't have to do anything. If you want the number of clients rather than the number of enrollments, then you want to do group summarization. And the way you do this is when you select group summarization, the default settings are usually what you want when you select group summarize. What that means is that they will provide a unique list or sum of all of these for each person. Now I see right away that there are some things Outcome Tracker for any number of fields will automatically sum when you choose group summarization, but we don't want that. So we can change this a little, like we can put the average. we can put a unique list, which basically means that if the client fills out this and says that they're 21 one day and then 22 the next, then it'll say 21 comma 22. Or if we average it, it'll say 21.5. If we do maximum, it'll say 22. If we do minimum, it'll say 21. Then you can do a count of unique values or a count. I find that first entered and last entered values are really helpful, so I think I'm going to put last entered value for this. What that means is that if the person said they were 21 and then 22, then it'll pull the information for 22. And then number of children, let's put last entered value again, and let's update this. And then we'll see what that looks like for Red Sally. So we see what we have here is one response. And then they don't have age or age of first child, they don't have any of that information. So none of that information was summarized. But you'll see here, if, for instance, if in the second enrollment that was on here, client enjoyed activities mostly false, and then the next one said mostly true, in this we would have mostly false, comma, mostly true, because we had selected a unique list for that. So that is how you summarize if you want the number of clients instead of the number of. You can summarize or group by any of the fields on your query, but almost definitely you will want to do it by name because those are the unique values for the client. Another thing to keep in mind is that you can hide columns. And hiding columns is pretty useful if you want to filter or summarize some information, but you don't necessarily want that information to display in the query or the report. So, for instance, I pulled in role membership status, but I never actually used it, so I think I'm going to hide that. And the only thing I have to do to hide it is click on it and click Hide on Display. And then I'm going to do the same thing for role. And I also pulled in system ID. Let's say I don't want that to display. So then I'll just click that. And then if we go back to results, we will see that the system ID, which would normally be right here, is not there. And then those two fields about the role at the end are gone. So they're still being filtered on by the filters, but they're not displaying in the results. And it's not uncommon for you to need to filter on a column that you actually don't want to display in the results. So that's how you would do that. You can hide, and then you can see easily which ones are hidden because it says yes here. I mentioned earlier that you can't pull in questions from multiple activities in the same query. And in order to do that, you would have to have a subquery. And I'm going to walk you through how to do that now. Subqueries are very helpful. Subqueries are used quite frequently to pull in demographic information from the admission intake. That is most often what they're used for. So I'm going to create a query that will pull some demographic information for me. Now, you may be a little bit confused because you think that the best place to pull demographic information is from here, and you might be right. For instance, if you want some name information or address information, this may be the place where you pull it. But true demographic information like gender, marital status, things like that, you'll probably pull actually from the admission intake. So let's go ahead and look at that. We still want this and this. This is a query just like the other one. And then we're going to go to question, show by activity, repeatable activities, admission intake form. And we could pull all of these over into the query, but let's just focus our attention on maybe Aboriginal status. And let's say we want to know the current marital status of anybody that is pulled into a query. So let's do those. and then we're going to filter for enrollment activity description equals, for this case, admission intake form. And I'm not going to filter on date because it's okay if this actually pulls all the information, because we want that. So now I'm going to go to reports. I'm going to find that first query. And then we'll go to columns. Now we're going to add the new columns from the subquery. Now this will look familiar. So what we want to do now is go to advanced. And this is how you add columns from the subquery. And queries. And this is in my personal folder, so you'll find the folder that your query is in, probably in your personal folder. And this is the one that I made. I want these first two, current marital status and aboriginal status. Finish. So what this does is this tells us what equals what in which query. And so basically, you probably will never change these settings. It may be the case that you want to. There may be reasons why you would need to, but mostly you will keep this the same. So basically what we're saying is that the name system ID equals the name system ID in both queries. And we only want to include results if they exist in this query. If they exist in this query, and not in this one, we don't really care about them. Which is to say, this one isn't filtered exactly the same, so it's going to pull information that's not on this one. But if that's the case, we don't really care about those. We only want people who are returned for this. Otherwise, we could do both queries, and that will return all information, or the secondary query, it will only show information if it's in this one and not in this one. And there may be reasons why I would want to do that, but most of the time you'll probably just keep these settings the same. Let's click finish. Now let's look at the results. Voila, you'll see the marital status has come through, the aboriginal status has not. It may be that these people just didn't fill out the aboriginal status, but the marital status has come through. So that is how you add subquery to your query. That will help you pull information from multiple activities into one query. And then one thing that I find really useful is when I'm looking at queries, if I go to the Dependencies tab, that subquery shows up under here. And if this query were a part of a report, that report would also show up here. So it's quite useful to switch between, if there's a, for instance, if there's a number that doesn't look right for you in your report, you can switch easily between the query, subquery, and report with this tab and try to figure out what the case may be, where the problem may be. And that is how you create queries in Outcome Tracker. So to summarize, we walked through sorting, filtering, and summarization. And we also talked about how to add a subquery if you want to pull information from more than one query, and how you will likely want to do that for demographic information. And we talked about hiding and displaying columns. So those are the most common settings that you will want to adjust when you're creating a query. Usually I would say that for most of these settings, the default setting is what you would want, but not always. It may be the case that you want to change some of the default settings on your query, but that is how you would do that, and that is how you create a query. And next we will walk through how to create a report.